Johnny. Good morning, everybody. For the past two Sundays, we have looked at two parables at the end of Jesus' ministry found in Matthew 21 and 22 that were judgment parables that forced us as readers to really examine our own hearts, where we put our trust in, what the kingdom of God is calling us or inviting us into. And the same's going to go for a continued conversation that we're going to go right off of the piggyback here in verse 15, in which involves a trap and a group of leaders who are desperate to hold on to their power. And what we can learn from this actually will make a big difference, I think, in our current life as well. So I'm going to just read the passage, and then we're going to come and unpack parts of it here. Verse 15 of chapter 22, Matthew 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why do you put to the test, you hypocrites? Put me to the test, you hypocrites. Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. This is a passage you've probably heard taught from the pulpit or certainly a class, and if there's a discussion attached to it, we usually talk about the practical implications of our government responsibilities and taxes and those things. And see, the passage here talks about how it's okay to pay taxes and such, and we see that here, and it helps us to organize ourselves in that way. But that passage really isn't about those things at all. And one of the reasons why I know this is because anyone who's taught the class on practical aspects of Christian life and taxes have never left that class going, "That was amazing. I marvel at the teaching," right? And yet that's the response that they have. So there's something more that's going on here, something I think is important for us to pay attention to. And I think that there's a certain amount of aspects in this passage that we need to pull out for where we are today. Now, we know how the story goes, but the people involved in the story here don't know where it goes, and they seem to have their backs against the wall. And so they're wanting to turn not to the Mosaic law, which they've used prior to trap Jesus, but they want to turn to politics in order to do that. So who are the parties involved here in the story? Well, we have the Pharisees. You know, the Pharisees are a group of religious one of the religious groups that are involved there. They were considered the separate ones. They were the ones who felt like they were the more righteous ones out of all of them. They stuck to the law very, very strictly. They made others do the same thing, and so they thought of themselves very highly than others. The other ones are the Herodians. These were people who were pro-Herod. They were folks who would We good? Perfect. They were people who would certainly be favorable to make sure that Herod stays in power. They were obviously them and the Pharisees were on different on different levels as far as they thought who should sit on the throne. Obviously, the Pharisees wanted a descendant of David, and so you have these anti-Roman people and pro-Roman people all together here, working together here to trap Jesus in his words, which means that whatever answer Jesus gives here is going to be the wrong answer. They feel like they have him trapped. And it has to do with whether you pay taxes to Caesar. Now, if you were an Israelite in this time and just frustrated at Roman occupation, and you have to carry around these coins that have Caesar's inscription on them, and you have to pay up to 50% of your taxes to the Roman Empire, obviously that was something that was both practically distressing and spiritually distressing. All right? And we certainly have this going on here. It was one of the key topics of contention around. For example, if there was to be Jewish and Gentile gatherings around Thanksgiving now, one of the topics that was off the table for Thanksgiving would be whether or not you pay taxes to Caesar. Right? Do not bring this up, because it's all it's going to do is cause contention, and before we even get to the pumpkin pie, there's going to be a fight. All right, this is one of those things that you do not bring up. So it was one of those areas, and so the Pharisees thought with the Herodians that they could do something to trap Jesus. Because if he says yes to paying the tax, he's going to lose influence, lose followers. When Jesus was a boy, there was a figure called Judas the what was his name? I lost it here. I don't know. I lost him. He was he was somebody who was working very, very hard to overthrow the government in the census. In fact, Acts 5 talks about him. I can't believe the microphone has thrown me off this morning completely. He was one in Acts 5 too that was a figure who tried to revolt, and he was definitely killed for doing that. But the way that his followers embraced that teaching was still around even in Jesus' time. So what you have here is you've got, if he says yes to paying taxes, well, he certainly is going to get in trouble with his own. If he says no to paying taxes, he's going to be in trouble for sedition, and that certainly gets you in trouble with the Roman occupation. So what he does is he says, give me the coin. And so he hands them the coin and says, whose inscription is on this? Now, we don't have a coin to show you, but the coin would have a picture of Caesar, his face on one side, on the other side, him sitting on the throne, and it would say Caesar, son of God. Because in their world, it was Judas the Galilean, by the way. It finally came back. Judas the Galilean, which doesn't matter anymore, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I can't believe I forgot it's just the Galilean. But anyways, there was, and so you have this inscription. And so this idea of Jesus going, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Give to God what belongs to God. I can't believe you guys are fighting over these idolatrous coins. Anyways, how much to keep of this? Give to Caesar what belongs to him. Give to God what belongs to him. And so therefore, Jesus shows incredible discernment and the ability to spot a trap. I mean, you could tell at the beginning of this, they were just laying on thick just how good of a person he is, and he's not partial and all these things. And Jesus could see right through that. But what's interesting about this is the Pharisees have tried so hard to trap him, and they actually turn to politics to finish the job, and they can't even do it with politics. And the trap doesn't work. When I think of the word trapped, I think is sometimes the struggle we have today as we talk about things. You feel trapped in conversations. Things are so contentious that you feel like whatever you say, that you're in a gotcha moment. And that's just not really fair at all. I don't think that's, the world's complicated. Issues are complicated, and sometimes a yes or no answer doesn't work, but everybody wants the things to be very binary. Jesus was masterful in basically not letting them trap him by addressing that these are the things that belong to Caesar. Give them to Caesar. He thinks he's powerful. We know he's a fake God. This does nothing for me. Do what you need to do. But give to God what is God's. You as an image bearer of God, you give to God your whole life, who you are, your allegiance, everything. And this passage for me has always been a longing for Jesus' church and how to address issues that go on in this world. There's so many issues in this world. They've always been this way. This is nothing new, where you have an issue and you have different sides of the opinion on the issue, how to address the issue. And sometimes people just fit comfortably in one area and others fit comfortably in the other area. But I love how Jesus doesn't really go that direction. And I think it shows us as a church how we ought to be different than just a simple answer that is on a certain side of the aisle. In a place of blue opinions and red opinions, the world would say, church, what do you think about these things? And the church would give an answer that transcends both those sides, that gives an answer that is different, that calls us with a more kingdom vision that would leave the crowd speechless, that would leave the crowd amazed, that we were able to say something that didn't fall nice and neat in each category, but transcended all that to point to the holiness and power of God. I would love to see that. I would love to see the church not try to get trapped in politics. When I was reading this passage this week and preparing, I was reminded how politics is just a part of life in many ways. We see it in all aspects of life. You see it in life, you see it at work, you see it at church. Sometimes you shouldn't, but it happens. Politics happens. But the word politics is a word that we use for everything that doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means. And the word politics at its purest form simply means a way in which we organize ourselves. That's what it is. And I've been, at times, even here, have said, I'm not very political. But it's somewhat of an ignorant thing to say because everybody's political, because everybody has an opinion on how you are to organize your life. Jesus was political. His politics was the kingdom of God. This is how I want you to order your life around these things. These are the things that matter. Order your life around the kingdom of God. That was the politics of Jesus. But partisan is different. Partisan is one-sided. Someone takes a side, and that becomes their side, and then they defend their side. And being partisan can be kind of tricky, especially if you're a follower of Jesus. So while Jesus was political, he was not partisan because there were plenty of parties, if you will, in his time, religious parties, they could easily have endorsed and said, now this party, out of all the parties we have, this is the best party to belong to. This is the most right party. This is the most spiritual party. This is the most righteous party. But he never did any of that. He challenged everyone's beliefs. And not that the beliefs were wrong, but that many times the beliefs were just incomplete. There were many things that each group held on to that was really, really good. And that it was a testament to their commitment to God and holiness to God. But at other times, they were somewhat incomplete. They weren't the full picture. And Jesus has always been about the completeness and wholeness and fullness of God's vision, not just aspects of God's vision. And so Jesus' vision of his kingdom transcended all of them, whether it was a Pharisee or a Sadducee or a Zealot or a Herodian or whoever it is. He had a way of transcending all of them and challenging all of their viewpoints in certain parts, pulling out the things that were good and challenging the things that were limited. This is what Jesus does. He does not tell them, well, out of all the groups, this is the best bad option you have. All right? He doesn't do that. He simply is committed to his vision of the kingdom of God and calls people to follow him and to join that vision. So this is a story not about government and practical things about taxes, but it's more about the kinds of people we are to be and not to be. It's no surprise that Jesus, full of wisdom and discernment, was able to spot a trap. But Jesus is neither naive nor cynical. Yet he is full of grace and full of truth, willing to engage in conversation but not allow himself to be trapped by the conversation, willing to play games along with them at times, but definitely willing to call them to a higher set of righteousness. And he tells them to give to God what belongs to God. And they would know what that means. As the people of God, the ones who have the law, the ones who have the community, the ones who have the covenants, they would know what it means to give to God what is God's. And not to allow the things that belong to Caesar's to upend their commitment to God, upend what they were called to give to God. And Jesus was coming to teach us about a better way to live that transcended all of that. But it also shows us the lengths that people will go and what they'll do to stay in power. It's one of the things that makes us cynical about politicians, if we talk about politicians, is what politicians are willing to do to stay in power, what they're willing to say to keep your vote. We know that usually they're games, and those of us who've been around long enough, we can spot the games. It's what gives politics really a bad rap. And they're doing that. They're doing whatever they can to keep their power, and they're making a terrible trade-off. They're making a terrible exchange. They're trading their power for what Jesus is offering them in terms of salvation and hope. And we've seen some bad trade-offs in the Bible. You know, the golden calf is one of them. That's a bad trade-off. In fact, Psalm 106 will tell us that they exchanged the glory of God for an image of an ox that eats grass. That idea there is to challenge the silliness of them to refuse the power of God and to choose something else to worship. Esau's birthright for a bowl of soup. Judas, 30 bags of silver for here's Jesus, take him. And then the passage that Robert read for us this morning really highlights this for us. This idea that we are to deny ourselves, take up our cross and follow Jesus. For whoever will save his life will lose it. Did you hear that? For those who work to save their lives will lose their lives. And those who are willing to lose their lives for the sake of Christ, they will find their lives. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? What shall a man give in return for his soul? That is an important question that all Christians should wrestle with. See, one of the struggles that Christians have, and one of the hard parts about teaching, is to remind Christians that at times you take a position of losing in order to gain. It seems very backwards, but so the kingdom of God is upside down. This is how Jesus overcame the power of sin and death on a cross, not through retaliation, but through sacrifice. And once we can understand that and see that, well, then that hopefully allows us to be and have the mind of Christ to understand how we organize the way in which we live. If you want to save your life, you're going to lose your life. It's not about winning. It's about faithfulness. It's always been about faithfulness. And faithfulness, in view of the world, looks like losing. We just participated in giving. We give sacrificially. We could easily keep that money for ourselves, but we give sacrificially. We give because we believe in something higher than ourselves. We're willing to lose some of our income in order to gain something that God lays before us. It's just one aspect of the practical ways in which we live. But what good is it if you gain the world? In this case, they were willing to hold power, keep power, gain power, work to do whatever they can to protect that power. And the question becomes, at what cost? At what cost are you willing to retain your power? And the church has been called to a much higher calling in life, where the fullness of God and redemption and the gospel at work in the lives of all people. Author Tim Keller has done a great job of framing out some of the things in Christians' relationship to politics even today. What Tim Keller has done, I think, is really helpful. He frames this out. He reminds us that the early church was a unique community that defied all categories. There were 5 elements to this church. Number 1, the church was multiracial, multi-ethnic. That was a brand new thing. We see many times the Jewish-Gentile community. At times it was very beautiful. At times it was very contentious. But we see that the churches were full of different kinds of people that were multiracial, multi-ethnic. Number 2, highly committed to caring for the poor and the marginalized. There's no denying that. We see that in Jesus' ministry. We see it in the early church. If you go back and read early Christian writings, you see what the church did in this way. You can thank all the hospitals in the world for the Christians. It's deeply in our DNA. When you go back to the Old Testament, you see how God was angry at Israel because they denied taking care of the poor. Number 3, they were non-retaliatory. They were marked by a commitment to forgiveness. Number 4, they were strongly and practically against abortion and infanticide. Number 5, they were revolutionary regarding the ethics of sex. He didn't explain what revolutionary means, but we know that the early church had a very high view of sexual purity, both for the single person and the married person, to the point that they were looked at from the greater Greek and Roman world as very weird in the way that they did that. So there was holiness involved in all of those things. Now, all five submit to biblical authority. All five are commanded. All five are offensive to a larger culture and also attractive to people in terms of its purity and value of human dignity and life. Now, Keller goes on to say that the first two sound rather liberal, ethnic diversity and caring for the poor. The last two sound rather conservative, sexual ethics, anti-abortion. The middle one, non-retaliatory and forgiving, sounds like no political party, and it's the one that seems to be missing in both political parties today. And the church is sometimes under strong pressure to choose the first two or the last two instead of to keep them all. And that's the vision of the church, is to keep all of them together. And by doing so, we help the witness of the church to continue and the power of the mission to go forward as well. The one we see that's lacking, the one that we stand up here and we grieve about, is certainly the one where this position of forgiveness, of kindness, non-retaliatory, seems to be missing in the world of politics. And what we have to protect against is that it does not enter into the world of the church as well. It's kind of why some Christians feel politically homeless in many ways. They see good things in certain parts of the party, but they see it as a limitation. They may see that these things I really hold on to, these things are very important. There's also good things on that side too. And so they sometimes feel politically homeless because they believe they keep all of those. Whether that is a care for others and certainly personal holiness and all those things. So the struggle becomes for us sometimes is to lose ourselves in the midst of what's happening in the world as we lose the vision of the church moving forward. Jesus calls the attempts of these political figures here malicious. They're using politics to try to do something damaging. Now, politics is a part of our lives. It's an important part of our lives. But there are limitations to it. And it's important for the church to always remember to not trade off the calling that we have to be holy people for the temporary ways in which politics work in our lives. Because what really matters for us is the character by which we choose. This story shows us two kinds of characters. You have Jesus, discerning, wise, clear on who he is, clear on who he belongs to, clear on his mission in life. And the others who are willing to trade the gift of Christ, the life of Christ, for temporary power and influence. They couldn't trap Jesus with his conduct, so they turned to politics to try to do the job. And when I think about that, I think about how Satan, if he can't trap us sometimes with our conduct, he can use other means to try to get us off track. And I think today, especially a day, it's so easy for Satan to use the power of that to influence the church, to get the church off the track, to give him a foothold. When he can't come after our moral character, maybe he can use other means to do that. So I pray that as the church that we are people who embrace the character of Christ, that we embrace the vision of the kingdom, which is about the important parts of the church being multiracial, multi-ethnic, committed to the poor and the marginalized, forgiving, against abortion and infanticide, against ways in which sex is being just completely turned upside down. All these things, that we would embrace all of those things to keep ourselves holy and pure as we look to what God is calling us to do. And to recognize that in a few weeks we'll all use our rights to vote and that we should do that. But let's remember that no matter what happens on that day, that when you take the expanse of history and what God's doing, that this time in our lives will be just a footnote in the great scheme of what God's doing. It'll just be a footnote.
The church is 2,000 years old. Look what it's gone through in 2,000 years. It is still here. It is still vibrant. It's still going to be here. So let not the things that happen outside the church to distress us at the point where we lose hope in the vision of the church, which is going to continue far beyond whoever gets elected this November. And the church's mission is going to stay the same regardless. It's going to be to serve others, to worship God, to care for other people, to be holy. It's not going to change. So we must be careful to protect the things that are God's, which is our soul, which is our calling, our mission. As we bear the image of God, we are to protect those things, not to let the outside world influence us, not to let it lead us down roads we should not go that don't look like Jesus anymore. But in a world that has sides, that the church can say, I have a better way. There's a third way. This is the kingdom of God. I call you to lay down your life, to pick up your cross, and to follow after Jesus. And when the church is committed to that vision, when the church is committed to doing those things, and that is powerful. It doesn't matter how bad things get in this world, it will draw people to Christ, and that's our role, to draw people to Christ through our conduct. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 and 12 tell us this. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles. Okay? A reminder that this is not our home, brothers and sisters. We are exiles here. To abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. This is it. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. Abstain from the passions of your flesh, the passions that are in you that want to lead you to react in certain ways that are not Christ-like. Abstain from those things. They will wage war against your soul. Protect your soul above all things. Protect your heart above all things. And when they speak of you as evildoers, let them, because it's your good deeds that will do the talking. And when the Lord comes, God will be glorified, and you will be exalted. And there will be great joy in that day. So as we wait for that day, let us wait focused on how we are to glorify God in all things.